the recorded lesson for lesson 23. In lesson 23, we cover the call imperfect conjugation in the singular form. So I'm basically going to read through this lesson and try to place it into the context of what we have learned up to this point and discuss some of the issues that are involved with the grammar that's covered in this lesson. And then we will look at some of the exercises that you can do for homework. So the katal, or the perfect, and the yiktol, the imperfect, were both introduced in lesson 15 as the main conjugations. This was the lesson where we did the overview of the verbal system, where we talked about the different ways that Hebrew uses verbs to make sense, to make meaning of language. So we talked about the perfect and the imperfect being the main conjugations. We've covered the perfect both in its singular form and its plural form in lessons 16 and 19. So now we're going to cover the imperfect conjugation in this lesson in the singular form and in the plural form in lesson 27. So the yiktol, or the imperfect, is an imperfect verb. It presents a partial view of an action or event. This action can be in the past, present, or future time, as we've mentioned a whole bunch of times. Hebrew does not talk about time with verbs. Context will tell us what tense we are in if we're talking about the past, present, or future, but the verb does not do that. However, since the partial view of an event typically describes events that are happening, like right now in the present, or are yet to happen, as in the future, we use a simple future English gloss or English translation in all the illustrations in this section. So when you're doing a translation and you come across an imperfect verb, you will almost always use a future, simple future tense in your English translation. So you will try that. You will try to translate it as future. And if that doesn't work, in English, then you will try maybe a present tense. So present tense sometimes, based on context, can work. More rarely it will be in the past. Sometimes we come across a context that would require an imperfect to be translated in the past, although that is quite rare. So here's the singular paradigm for the call imperfect. So the call is the binyan that we're working with. It is still the only one that we know right now. The imperfect is the conjugation. So now we know the perfect and we're being introduced to the imperfect. We see it here. As before, we have our subject pronouns at the beginning of each of these examples, just to highlight how they are connected. So here we have hu yishmor. This is he will guard. He will guard. This is he tishmor. She will guard. Ata tishmor. You will guard. At tishmari. You will guard. At tishmari. And here is I will guard. Ani eshmor. Ani eshmor. So what you're going to notice is that the imperfect conjugation will always have what we call a prefix. Something has been added to the front of your shorish, your root. Here's your root, the shin, the mem, and the resh. Something has been added to the front. So here we have the yod with the hirik, and then the tav and the hirik, tav, hirik, and then an aleph with the segel. You'll notice that she will guard and you will guard, the third feminine singular and the second masculine singular, look exactly the same. So we're ignoring the subject pronoun because that's not always required in a sentence. But the verb itself will look the same, and you will only be able to tell which is which by context. So you'll have to look at your context, find your subject, if there is a subject in the clause, or based on the previous clause. Figure out who the subject of the verb is, and then you'll be able to decide if it's third feminine singular or second masculine singular. This is probably the trickiest part of the imperfects. that these two look exactly the same. So Tishmore and Tishmore, she will guard or you will guard. So we're looking for prefixes, something attached to the front of the verb that tells us that it is imperfect. The imperfect also has several forms that have something attached to the end. So we see that down here in the second feminine singular. This is Tishmari. This E ending is added on along with the tav on the front. Tishmari. And then finally again down here we have the first common singular. So the aleph is added with a segel vowel underneath, so Eshmore. Notice that this O vowel in the second syllable is consistent, except for in this form here, that O vowel has disappeared because we added something onto the end and it has changed our syllables. So the O vowel has disappeared. But it's pretty consistent all the way through the call imperfect singular. So that's another clue, another sign that it is an imperfect that we're working with. The main sign, though, of the imperfect is the prefix on the front. All right, so let's look at how the imperfect can be translated in some more detail. Our authors write, the imperfect, like the perfect conjugation, can express both real and irreal events. So that is to say, these verbs can talk about something that has actually happened or something that will actually happen. For the imperfect, and an irreal event, something that might happen in the future, or maybe, should, possibly, could happen in the future. So this is the irreal. Again, it's distinguished by word order, just as it was with the perfect. So the real mood is found with a subject-verb word order, as in this example, Va'ed ya'aleh min ha'aretz, and a spring was coming up from the land. So this is our subject, the spring. This is our verb. Notice the yod has been attached to the front, so we know it's an imperfect. It's third masculine singular. And we're translating this as coming up in the present, was coming up. The spring was coming up from the land. So this is a real mood, because this event is actually happening. Notice it's also an incomplete view of the event. We don't see the beginning of this event, nor do we see the end of it. The spring is coming up. All we see is what's happening right now. We would need a perfect if we saw the beginning, the middle, and the end of this event. A spring came up from the ground. Well, that would be a perfect because we see the whole event. Here we only see what is happening at one moment of the event, the coming up from the ground. So Va'ed ya'aleh min ha'aretz, and a spring was coming up from the ground. This is a real mood. The irreal mood, we'll see a verb subject word order. The verb has been moved to the front. Let's look at the example. Ya'aseh paro v'yafked p'kidim al ha'aretz. It's translated as Pharaoh should act and he should appoint ones who are appointed or overseers over the land. So here we have two imperfect verbs, right here, ya'aseh, and right here, yafked. Both of them are irreal. Pharaoh is the subject. Pharaoh has been moved to after the verb, and the verb's at the beginning. So this one we know is irreal because of the word order. And we have to add in English the should. Pharaoh should act. Sometime in the future he should, but maybe he won't. We don't know. That's why it's irreal, because it might happen in the future. Here, we don't have a verb in this clause, so the word order is not terribly helpful for us. But you might remember that irreal verbs will often have a vav attached to them. So we see this vav attached to the front of the imperfect, vav with a shva, and we know that this is irreal. Pharaoh should act and appoint, and he should appoint overseers. So both of these are irreal verbs. both of them are imperfect, and both of them should be translated with should or might or could or possibly will sometime in the future. So both of them should probably be translated in the future tense as well. Let me also note down here the irreal perfect can express the same range of irreal modality as the irreal perfect, though most frequently it expresses categorical negative prohibitions. It's a real complicated way to say that the irreal perfect is almost always found with the negation lo in a command not to do something. So these are the 10 commandments coming out of Exodus, or a few of the 10 commandments coming out of Exodus. Do not kill. Here we have an imperfect. Do not kill. In the future, you should not kill. All right, so this is an irreal perfect. So here we have do not commit adultery and do not steal. These are not in a different conjugation that is a command. These are the irreal perfect. In the future, you should not kill. All right, so this is how the irreal perfect is mostly found. Most of the time we'll find it following the negation lo, but not all of the time. All right, so this is the imperfect. The key things we need to remember from the perfect or the imperfect, the yiktol, the imperfect, is that it is normally translated in the future. It only gives us a little snapshot of the event, not the entire event. And we will always have something attached to the front of the verb for the imperfects. So here we have these different letters attached to the front of our root to help us know that these are imperfects. Some imperfects will have something attached to the end, depending on their person, number, and gender. So we need to put this chart into our brains and remember the keys. The imperfect is normally translated in the future. The imperfect gives us a snapshot of the event, not the entire event. And the imperfect will always have something attached to the front of the root and the call binyan.